In the bone-chilling grip of a Montana blizzard, a black widow clutched her starving children at an abandoned railway station for 3 desperate days, until a weathered rancher dismounted through the snow and declared, "You're coming with me." The townspeople had already written her obituary in their whispered judgments, another colored family destined to freeze into frontier folklore, forgotten by spring's thaw. She would surely perish like the others before her, they murmured, crossing themselves as they hurried past her makeshift shelter. But this grizzled cattleman carried ghosts in his weathered eyes, debts that demanded payment from 15 winters past. What neither the dying woman nor the reluctant rancher knew was that their fates had been bound by blood, land, and a fortune buried beneath Montana soil, a secret that men had killed to possess. Would his intervention save them both, or doom them to a war they never saw coming? The train wheezed to a halt 3 miles outside Copper Falls, Montana. Black smoke poured from its engine like the dying breath of some iron beast. Edamie Hargrove pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around 8-year-old Samuel and 6-year-old Grace as passengers filed past them toward the depot. She counted the coins in her worn leather pouch. 17 cents. Not enough for lodging, not enough for meals, barely enough for hope. The other passengers disappeared into the storm, their boots crunching through snow toward the warm glow of the town's hotel. Edamie gathered her children and their single carpetbag, stepping into the howling wind. Copper Falls stretched before them like a collection of wooden boxes scattered by a giant's hand. Smoke curled from chimneys. Lamplight flickered in frost-covered windows. The promise of warmth existed everywhere except for them. She pushed through the general store's door first. The bell jangled overhead as conversations died. 3 men in wool coats turned to stare. The shopkeeper's wife clutched her shawl tighter. "We're looking for work," Edamie said. "I can clean, cook, mend clothes." The shopkeeper shook his head before she finished speaking. His eyes never met hers. "Nothing available." Grace shivered against her mother's leg. Samuel stood straighter, trying to be the man he thought he needed to be. The hotel proved no different. The desk clerk glanced up from his ledger, took in their appearance, and returned to his writing. "Full up. I saw empty rooms from outside. Full up." They tried the boarding house, the seamstress shop, the church. Each door closed with the same polite finality, each face turned away with practiced indifference. By nightfall, they huddled in the railway depot's waiting room. A single oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls. The wind rattled the windows like skeletal fingers seeking entry. Samuel pressed close to his mother's side. Grace had stopped asking when they would eat. The depot master arrived the next morning with coffee and suspicion. "Can't have you camping here indefinitely. The next train east. 3 days, 3 days." Edamie nodded as if this news didn't crush what remained of her hope. Samuel found scraps behind the hotel kitchen, potato peels and bread crusts that the cook threw to the dogs. He shared them with Grace, pretending it was a feast. Edamie watched the townspeople pass by the depot windows. Some glanced toward them with curiosity, others with disgust. Most simply looked through them as if they were already ghosts. On the second day, Jasper Finnegan arrived. He wore a fine wool coat and carried himself like a man who had never missed a meal. His boots were polished despite the mud and slush. His smile never reached his cold blue eyes. "Heard we had some visitors." Edamie stood, placing herself between this stranger and her children. Jasper circled them slowly, like a vulture evaluating carrion. "Funny thing about visitors. They tend to move on eventually." He paused by the window, gazing out at the storm clouds gathering again. "One way or another." He left without another word, but his meaning hung in the air like smoke. Grace grew weaker on the third day. Her lips had lost their color. Her small hands felt cold even when pressed against her mother's warm skin. Samuel tried to share his own meager findings, but there was so little to share. Edamie found herself studying the horses tied outside the saloon. She knew their breeds by the set of their shoulders, the arch of their necks. The bay mare showed signs of lameness in her left foreleg. The gray gelding needed better grooming and proper grain. Strange knowledge for a desperate widow. Knowledge that would have raised questions if anyone cared enough to ask, but nobody asked questions of the dying. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Grace collapsed while trying to help Samuel gather kindling. She folded like a paper doll, crumpling to the depot floor with a soft sigh. Edamie gathered her daughter in her arms. Grace's breathing came in shallow gasps. Her eyes fluttered but wouldn't focus. Samuel began to cry, not the loud sobs of childhood, but the quiet tears of someone who understood that tears wouldn't change anything. Outside, the wind picked up again. Snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes that would bury the depot by morning. The oil lamp flickered, running low on fuel. Edamie held both her children close and whispered the only prayer she had left. Not for miracles, not for salvation, just for enough time to keep them warm until the end came gently. The depot door creaked open, bringing a gust of frozen air and the sound of heavy boots on wooden floors. If you are enjoying this story of how one desperate decision will change 3 lives forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next 15 minutes in this snow-covered depot will completely transform everything they thought they knew about survival, justice, and the hidden bonds that tie strangers together. Silas Rutherford filled the doorway like a mountain given human form. Snow clung to his weathered coat and wide-brimmed hat. His gray beard held ice crystals that caught the lamplight. He studied the scene before him. The woman clutching her unconscious daughter. The boy trying not to cry. The empty depot that had become their tomb. Something twisted in his chest. A memory 15 years buried. "You're coming with me." The words left his mouth before his mind could stop them. Edamie looked up with eyes that had already accepted death. She blinked, wondering if hypothermia had started the hallucinations. Grizz moved forward, his massive hand surprisingly gentle as he lifted Grace from her mother's arms. The child weighed nothing. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "Can you walk?" Edamie nodded, though her legs shook when she stood. Samuel grabbed their carpetbag and stayed close to his mother's side. Outside, Grizz's horse stood patient in the storm. A sturdy quarter-horse mare with intelligent eyes and sure footing. Grizz lifted Grace onto the saddle, then Samuel behind her. "Hold your sister." The boy wrapped his arms around Grace protectively. Grizz helped Edamie climb up, then swung into the saddle behind them all. 4 people on a horse built for 2, but the mare didn't complain. They rode through streets empty of witnesses, past windows glowing with warmth that had been denied to them, past the hotel that claimed to be full, past the church that had turned them away. The ride took 20 minutes through countryside buried in white. Grizz's ranch sprawled across a valley protected by pine-covered hills. The main house sat solid and welcoming, smoke rising from its chimney. A stable hand emerged to take the horse. Grizz carried Grace inside while Edamie and Samuel followed on unsteady legs. The house smelled of coffee and wood smoke and something Edamie had almost forgotten: safety. Grizz's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, took one look at the children and sprang into action. She had warm milk ready in minutes, thick blankets, a fire crackling in the hearth. Grace's eyes fluttered open as warmth returned to her small body. She smiled when she saw Samuel eating bread with real butter. Edamie watched her children come back to life and felt her own heart restart. "Thank you," she whispered. Grizz waved off her gratitude like shooing away a fly. "Got rooms upstairs. Food's ready when you are." But Edamie couldn't sit still. Charity felt like poison in her veins. She moved to the kitchen, began washing dishes without asking permission. Mrs. Chen tried to protest, but Edamie was already scrubbing pans. "I work for my keep." Grizz watched from the doorway. This woman moved through his kitchen like she belonged there. Her hands knew their way around cookware and cleaning, but something else caught his attention. Through the window, she could see his horses in the paddock. Her eyes tracked their movements with the knowledge of someone who understood what she was seeing. "That bay gelding favors his right foreleg," she said, without looking away from the dishes. Grizz stepped closer. How'd you know that? The way he plants his weight, probably an old injury that flares up in cold weather. She was right. Grizz had been dealing with that horse's lameness for months. You know horses. My father taught me. Something flickered across her face. Before he died. The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Grace played by the fire while Samuel helped Mrs. Chen with breakfast. Edamie stood in the paddock with the bay gelding, running her hands along his legs with practiced skill. She found the problem in his hoof, a stone wedged deep in the frog, causing an abscess that had been building pressure for weeks. She worked it free with tools from the barn, then cleaned and treated the wound. The horse stood perfectly still for her ministrations, as if he recognized her touch. Grizz watched from the fence rail. This woman moved like the cowboys he'd known. Her hands were gentle but confident. Her voice carried the low, soothing tones that horses trusted. She reminded him of someone. Where'd you learn to work horses like that? Edamie's hands stilled for a moment. Texas. Before I married, my father was a cowboy. Something cold ran down Grizz's spine. What was his name? Ezekiel. Ezekiel Hargrove. The world tilted. Grizz gripped the fence rail as 15 years collapsed into a single moment. The blizzard of 1872. The black cowboy who'd found him half frozen in a ditch. The man who'd saved his life and helped him build this ranch. The man who'd spoken often of his daughter back east. The daughter he was educating. The daughter he'd wanted to give a better life than the frontier could offer. Zeke Hargrove was your father. Edamie nodded, confused by the sudden intensity in his voice. Grizz's legs nearly gave out. He'd been carrying a debt to a dead man for 15 years. And now that debt had walked into his life in the form of a starving widow and her children. But it was more than debt. Much more. Inside his house, locked in a strongbox behind his desk, lay documents that would change everything. Papers that Ezekiel had entrusted to him before riding out on his final cattle drive. Papers that made Edamie Hargrove one of the richest women in Montana Territory. Grizz disappeared into his study without explanation. Edamie heard the scrape of heavy furniture being moved, the click of metal on metal, the creak of a strongbox opening for the first time in years. He returned carrying a leather portfolio tied with string. His hands shook as he set it on the kitchen table. Sit down. Edamie dried her hands on her apron. Something in his voice made her stomach tighten. Samuel and Grace looked up from their breakfast, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. Grizz untied the string with reverent care. Inside lay documents yellowed with age, maps, survey reports, official seals that caught the morning light. Your father saved my life in 1872. His voice carried the weight of old grief. Found me half dead in a snowbank 20 miles north of here. Brought me to his camp, nursed me back to health. Edamie's breath caught. Her father had never mentioned saving anyone, but then he'd rarely spoken of his adventures. Always said the past was for learning, not for boasting. We became partners after that, built this ranch together, ran cattle from here to Denver. Grizz pulled out a faded photograph. 2 men standing beside a corral. One white, one black, both grinning like they owned the world. Edamie touched the image of her father's face. He looked younger than she remembered, happier. He talked about you all the time, his brilliant daughter back east, getting an education, learning to read and write better than most men. Grizz's eyes grew distant. Said he was building something for you, something that would give you choices. The first document made Edamie's hands tremble. A land deed bearing her father's signature and her own name. 2,000 acres of prime Montana Territory grazing land. He bought this before he died, put it in your name, said someday you'd need a place to come home to. The second document stopped her heart, a mineral rights agreement signed by the territorial governor. Her father's land sat atop one of the largest copper deposits ever surveyed in Montana. He knew about the copper, suspected, had a prospector friend who did some quiet testing. Your father was smarter than most gave him credit for. Edemy stared at papers that transformed her from desperate widow to wealthy landowner in the space of a heartbeat. Samuel and Grace pressed close, sensing something momentous without understanding what. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? Had to be sure you were really his daughter. Had to see if you inherited his way with horses. His backbone. Grizz managed to smile. You did. But the weight of revelation brought new fears. Edemy looked out the window toward town where Jasper Finnegan and men like him waited. People have been trying to claim this land. For years, Jasper's been sniffing around since your father died, filing false claims, bribing officials, claiming abandoned property rights. The pieces clicked into place. Jasper's predatory circling at the depot, his casual cruelty, his confidence that she would disappear one way or another. He knows about the copper, suspects, has friends in the territorial office who talk too much over whiskey. Edemy's mind raced through implications. She owned valuable land, but proving that ownership meant exposing herself to greater danger. Men had killed for less than copper rights in Montana territory. What happens now? Grizz stood and moved to his gun cabinet, not to threaten but to check that his weapons were clean and loaded. Old habits from harder times. Now we fight. Legal-like if possible. Your father left everything proper and legal. Witnesses, seals, survey marks. But legal doesn't always matter when there's real money involved. Samuel looked up from his eggs. Are we rich, Mama? Edemy smoothed his hair, wishing the answer were simple. We have something valuable, baby. But having something and keeping it are different things. Grace climbed into her mother's lap, unconcerned with adult complications. She was warm and fed and safe. Everything else seemed manageable from her 6-year-old perspective. But Edemy understood the target now painted on their backs. Yesterday she'd been a dying woman with nothing to lose. Today she was a wealthy landowner with everything at stake. Jasper won't give up easy, Grizz continued. He's got connections in territorial government, friends who owe him favors, money to throw around. Then we make sure the law works the way it's supposed to. You sound like your father. Edemy studied the documents again. Her father's careful handwriting, his signature bold and confident. He'd built this future for her when she was still a child playing with dolls. He taught me more than horses, Mr. Rutherford. He taught me that running away doesn't solve problems. It just gives them room to grow. Grizz nodded with approval. Zeke always said you had his stubborn streak. Outside, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their planning. Multiple riders moving fast across frozen ground. Grizz moved to the window, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. Jasper Finnegan led a group of 6 men toward the house, all well-armed, all wearing the expressions of men accustomed to getting their way through intimidation. Seems word travels fast in small towns, Grizz muttered. Edemy stood, smoothing her dress and squaring her shoulders. The frightened widow who'd nearly died in the depot was gone. In her place stood Ezekiel Hargrove's daughter. Then let's give them something worth talking about. Jasper didn't dismount. He sat his horse like a man delivering an eviction notice, his pale eyes scanning the ranch buildings with proprietary interest. Heard you took in some strays, Grizz. My guests aren't your concern, Jasper. Funny thing about strays. They tend to claim territory that doesn't belong to them. Edemy stepped onto the porch, Samuel and Grace safely behind her in the house. She met Jasper's stare without flinching. Something you need, Mr. Finnegan. Just making sure everyone understands the local customs, vagrancy laws, property rights, that sort of thing. Grizz's jaw tightened. The lady's not vagrant. She's a landowner. Jasper's laugh held no humor. According to who? Some old papers that might not hold up to proper scrutiny. The threat hung in the morning air like gun smoke. Jasper touched his hat brim in mock politeness and wheeled his horse around. His men followed, but not before each took a long look at the ranch buildings, memorizing layouts and weak points. Enjoy your hospitality, ma'am. Hope it lasts. They rode away, but their message was clear. The war had begun. Grizz spent the afternoon checking fence lines and security. Edemy used the time differently. She walked her inherited land for the first time, Samuel and Grace running ahead through snow-covered pastures. The property stretched farther than her eyes could measure. Good grazing land with natural windbreaks and year-round water sources. Her father had chosen well. Near the eastern boundary, she found survey stakes that didn't match the territorial records. Fresh cuts in the wood, recent placement. Someone's been busy, she murmured, examining the fraudulent markers. That evening, Grizz returned with visitors. Tom Fletcher owned the neighboring spread. Martha Webb ran the territory's only female-owned business, a freight company that moved goods between settlements. Both carried worry lines that hadn't been there a week ago. Jasper's been making rounds, Tom explained, asking questions about mineral rights, offering cash for information. Martha nodded grimly. Got friends in territorial government claiming there's irregularities in old land grants, specifically ones involving certain types of previous owners. The coded language fooled nobody. They meant land owned by black folks wouldn't get the same legal protection as white folks' property. What's your advice? Edamy asked. Document everything, get witnesses, file proper paperwork before Jasper can muddy the legal waters. Tom handed her a business card. Judge Morrison's honest, been territorial judge for 15 years. Doesn't take bribes. Can we trust him? Much as you can trust any white man when money's involved, Martha said bluntly, but he's better than most. Over the following days, Edamy established her presence in Copper Falls. She opened an account at the bank, presenting her land deeds with quiet confidence. The banker's eyebrows rose at the property values, but he processed her paperwork without comment. She visited the general store, paying cash for supplies and introducing herself to the owner's wife as the new neighbor. Her manners were impeccable, her education obvious, her children polite and well-behaved. Word spread quickly in a town of 300 souls. The desperate widow from the depot had transformed into a woman of substance and property. Not everyone approved of the transformation. Uppity, she heard whispered behind her back. Getting ideas above her station. Won't last long out here. But other voices began to emerge. Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, mentioned needing help with the younger children. Edamy volunteered immediately, bringing Samuel and Grace with her. She worked with students who struggled with reading, regardless of their family's economic status or background. The Miller boy, whose father couldn't afford proper schooling. The Thompson twins, whose mother had died in childbirth. Even young Billy Kowalski, whose Polish immigrant parents spoke little English. Her patience was endless. Her teaching methods effective. Within 2 weeks, children who'd been failing began to flourish. Parents took notice. Grateful families began nodding respectfully when she passed on the street. A few even tipped their hats. She's good with the children, Mrs. Patterson told anyone who would listen. Smart as a whip, educated back east somewhere. The tide of public opinion began its slow shift. Evenings at the ranch became strategy sessions. Grizz had friends throughout the territory who owed him favors. Men who'd survived hard winters and harder times with his help. Cowboys and ranchers who respected honest work over political connections. They brought information. Jasper was indeed working with territorial officials to challenge Edamy's inheritance. False claims about document authenticity. Questions about her father's legal standing when he purchased the property. Bureaucratic weapons designed to tie up the courts for years. Time's on his side, Grizz explained. Long as the land's tied up in legal disputes, he can work his connections, get the right palms greased, the right judges appointed. Then, we don't let it drag out. Edamy had been studying territorial law in Grizz's collection of legal books. Her Eastern education included enough legal principles to understand the system's mechanics. Judge Morrison's planning a circuit through Copper Falls next month. We request a formal hearing, present all evidence at once, force a quick decision. Risky. If we lose, there's no appeal. If we wait, we lose anyway. Jasper's got time and money. We've got the law and the truth. Samuel looked up from his schoolwork. What if the truth isn't enough? The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Everyone in the room knew that truth and justice didn't always align in Montana territory, especially when copper deposits were involved. "Then we make it enough," Edemy said simply. The surveyor arrived on a Tuesday morning, riding a government horse and carrying official credentials. He claimed routine boundary verification, but his eyes held the calculating gleam of a man mapping treasure. Edemy watched from her kitchen window as he paced her property lines with measuring chains and compass. His assistant drove stakes into ground that had already been properly marked years ago. "Third survey this month," Grizz observed, joining her at the window. "Government's suddenly very interested in accurate measurements." The surveyor spent extra time near the creek bed where mineral samples had been taken. He collected soil specimens in small glass vials, labeling each with careful notation. That evening, Jasper visited the surveyor's camp. They spoke for over an hour by lamplight, examining maps and pointing toward Edemy's property. Money changed hands in the flickering shadows. "He's building a case," Martha Webb warned during her next visit. "Claims your father's original survey was flawed, property lines drawn incorrectly, mineral rights extending beyond legal boundaries." The legal trap was taking shape. Even if Edemy won her inheritance case, Jasper could claim the most valuable portions of her land through surveying technicalities and bureaucratic manipulation. But Edemy had been busy with her own investigation. Late at night, while her children slept and Grizz stood watch, she studied every document her father had left. His meticulous record-keeping revealed a man who understood exactly what he was building. Hidden among property deeds and business correspondence, she found her father's insurance policy, copies of every survey, witness statements from the original boundary marking, geological reports from 3 different prospectors, all confirming the same massive copper deposit. Most importantly, she found letters, communications between her father and territorial officials from 15 years ago. Men still alive, men still in positions of authority, men who could testify that every aspect of Ezekiel Hargrove's land purchase had been legal, proper, and thoroughly documented. "He knew this day would come," she whispered, spreading the letters across Grizz's dining table. "He prepared for a fight I didn't even know existed." One letter changed everything. A communication from the territorial governor's office, acknowledging Ezekiel's mineral rights and guaranteeing governmental protection for his legal heirs. The signature belonged to Marcus Chen, current territorial administrator and the governor's right-hand man, the same official who'd been quietly questioning the validity of her inheritance. Chen had forgotten his own signature, his own guarantee, his own legal promise to protect Ezekiel Hargrove's legacy. "Got him," Grizz breathed, reading over her shoulder. But victory brought new dangers. The next morning, Samuel's horse came back riderless from his regular ride to town. The boy was found 2 hours later, tied to a tree a mile from the main road, unharmed but terrified. "Man said to tell you that accidents happen to children who wander too far from home," Samuel reported, trying to be brave but unable to stop shaking. Grace refused to leave the house after that. She clung to her mother's skirts and jumped at sudden noises. The carefree child who'd played in the snow had been replaced by a frightened little girl who understood that bad men wanted to hurt her family. Jasper's desperation was showing. Legal maneuvers had failed to intimidate Edemy. Public opinion was shifting in her favor. The upcoming hearing represented his last chance to claim her inheritance through quasi-legal means. So he'd escalated to threats against children. "Time to end this," Grizz stated, loading his rifle with grim determination. "No," Edemy's voice carried absolute authority. "We end this the right way, in court, with law and evidence and truth. They threatened your children, and if we respond with violence, they win anyway. Samuel and Grace deserve better than a mother who solves problems with bullets." She spent the night writing letters to territorial officials, to newspaper editors, to every person of influence within 100 miles who might care about justice over profit. Each letter detailed Jasper's threats, his fraudulent surveys, his attempts to steal legally owned property through intimidation and corruption. She documented everything with dates, witnesses, and supporting evidence. Most importantly, she sent copies to Marcus Chen with a simple message attached. Honor your signature or explain to the governor why you've been helping men steal property you guaranteed to protect. The response came within days. Chen requested an immediate meeting in the territorial capital. Jasper was ordered to appear as well, along with all documentation supporting his claims. "He's scared," Martha observed, reading Chen's hastily written summons. "Scared men make mistakes." Judge Morrison's circuit arrived early, responding to Chen's urgent request. The territorial administrator wanted this matter resolved quickly and quietly, before newspaper attention could damage careers and reputations. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday in Copper Falls Community Hall. Public attendance welcomed, press coverage encouraged. Jasper tried one final gambit. He offered to purchase Edamy's land for twice its assessed value minus mineral rights, cash payment, immediate settlement, no questions asked. Generous offer, he claimed, presenting official-looking purchase documents, more than fair for everyone involved. Edamy studied the papers carefully. The offer would make her comfortable for life. Her children would receive excellent educations. They could move somewhere safer, more welcoming. She could walk away from the fight with dignity and financial security intact. Samuel and Grace watched their mother's face as she considered Jasper's proposal. Their futures hung in the balance of her decision. Outside, snow began falling again, just like that desperate night at the depot when death seemed inevitable. But this time, Edamy Hargrove was no longer the helpless widow begging for scraps. She was Ezekiel Hargrove's daughter, and she had a choice to make. Edamy set Jasper's purchase offer on the table without signing it. "My father didn't build this legacy so I could sell it to the first man who threatened my children." Jasper's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. Court decisions can be appealed. Accidents can happen. Think about those children." "I am thinking about them. I'm thinking they deserve a mother who fights for what's right." Monday morning arrived with crystalline skies and bitter cold. The community hall filled beyond capacity. Townspeople crowded into every available seat. Others stood along the walls, whispering among themselves about the outcome that would reshape Copper Falls forever. Judge Morrison took his place at the makeshift bench, a stern man with gray whiskers and no tolerance for legal theatrics. Marcus Chen sat at the territorial table, perspiration beading his forehead despite the winter chill. Jasper arrived with 3 lawyers from Helena, their expensive suits and confident smirks announcing their belief in inevitable victory. They carried boxes of documents, surveys, and affidavits designed to bury the truth under mountains of technical objections. Edamy entered with only Grizz beside her and a single leather portfolio in her hands. Samuel and Grace sat in the front row with Mrs. Chen, their faces serious beyond their years. "Case of Finnegan versus Hargrove Estate," Judge Morrison announced. "Territorial land dispute concerning mineral rights and property inheritance." Jasper's lead attorney stood first, a silver-haired man named Blackwood who spoke with practiced authority. "Your Honor, my client's surveys reveal significant irregularities in the original land grant. Property boundaries were incorrectly established. Mineral rights were improperly assigned to an individual lacking legal standing at the time of purchase." The coded language was unmistakable. They claimed Ezekiel Hargrove had no right to own property because of his race, despite territorial laws clearly establishing otherwise. Blackwood presented fraudulent surveys, manipulated boundary markers, and testimony from men who'd been paid to lie about Ezekiel's character and legal standing. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, the defendant cannot provide adequate documentation of her own legal inheritance. Property this valuable requires extraordinary proof of legitimate succession. When he finished, the courtroom buzzed with murmured conversations. His presentation was polished, professional, and convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth. Judge Morrison looked toward Etta Mee. "Your response, ma'am." She stood slowly, smoothing her best dress and meeting the judge's eyes with quiet dignity. The leather portfolio felt heavy in her hands, weighted with 15 years of her father's careful preparation. "Your Honor, I have here a letter signed by Territorial Administrator Chen, guaranteeing protection for my father's legal rights and acknowledging his legitimate ownership of all mineral deposits on his properly surveyed land." She handed the letter to Judge Morrison. Marcus Chen's face went white as he recognized his own signature and official seal. "I also have the original survey documentation, witnessed by 3 territorial officials and certified by the Government Land Office. Every boundary marker matches exactly with current territorial records." More documents followed: geological reports, purchase receipts, witness statements from men still alive and willing to testify. "Finally, I have correspondence between my father and current territorial officials, including Mr. Chen, acknowledging that his land purchase was legal, proper, and fully documented according to territorial law." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Morrison examined each document. Marcus Chen loosened his collar, sweat now visible despite the cold morning air. Mrs. Patterson stood from the gallery. "Your Honor, may I speak as a community member?" "Proceed." "This woman has helped our children, taught them reading and mathematics, shown more character in 2 months than some folks show in a lifetime. Her inheritance is legal, and her presence here benefits our entire community." Tom Fletcher rose next. "She's been a good neighbor, honest in her dealings, respectful of property boundaries, everything a landowner should be." One by one, townspeople stood to offer testimony: the schoolchildren she'd helped, parents whose families she'd assisted, business owners who'd found her honest and reliable. Even some who'd initially opposed her spoke in her favor, swayed by her actions and character over the previous weeks. Judge Morrison called for order, then fixed his stern gaze on Marcus Chen. "Administrator Chen, do you recognize your signature on this territorial guarantee?" Chen squirmed in his chair. "Yes, Your Honor. And do you stand by the legal commitments made in this document?" A long pause. The entire courtroom held its breath. "Yes, Your Honor. The territorial government honors its legal obligations." Judge Morrison's gavel echoed through the silent hall. "This court finds in favor of Mrs. Hargrove. Her inheritance is legal, proper, and fully protected under territorial law. All mineral rights, property boundaries, and land ownership privileges are hereby confirmed and enforced." Jasper's face turned purple with rage, but his lawyers restrained him from any outburst that might result in contempt charges. Outside the courthouse, Etta Mee was surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations. Samuel and Grace pressed close to their mother, finally understanding that they were safe. Grizz approached with a smile broader than Montana sky. "Your father would be proud. He gave me everything I needed to fight. I just had to be brave enough to use it." 1 year later, the railway depot where Etta Mee had nearly died housed a thriving freight office. Her copper mine employed half the men in Copper Falls, paying fair wages regardless of background or color. A new family had arrived on the morning train: a Mexican woman with 2 small children and nowhere to go. They sat in the same waiting room where desperation had once ruled. Etta Mee approached them with warm blankets and hot coffee. "You're coming with me." The cycle of compassion continued, transforming lives and building a community where justice mattered more than prejudice, and courage counted more than color. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.